Every single second, 2 people die from age-related diseases. By the time I finish this sentence, 4 more lives are gone, most from conditions like cancer, heart failure, or dementia. And here is the unsettling truth. Science now tells us that the majority of these deaths are not inevitable. They're preventable. Imagine what that means. What if the slow decline we call aging isn't a natural law like gravity, but a medical condition? One we can treat, slow down, maybe even reverse. That's the claim Harvard geneticist David Sinclair makes in his groundbreaking book Lifespan. And it's not speculation. The technology is already being tested. Think about how medicine works today. We fight one disease at a time: heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's. It's like patching leaks on a sinking ship while ignoring the hole in the hull. Sinclair argues the real culprit isn't those individual illnesses. The real culprit is aging itself. If we target aging, we don't just slow one disease. We hit all of them at once. That's why scientists call aging the mother of all diseases. And it's why stopping it, or even pausing it, may be the single most important breakthrough in human history. So what does this tech look like? Not silver bullets or magic potions, but real, testable tools. Metformin, a cheap diabetes drug, appears to reduce cancer, heart disease, and extend lifespan in animals. Rapamycin, discovered on a remote island, shuts down the body's growth mode and flips it into repair mode, making mice live longer and healthier. And AD boosters, like NMN, restore energy to aging cells. In the lab, old mice regain the stamina of youth, running farther, stronger, faster. And then there's the most jaw-dropping: cellular reprogramming. By flipping a handful of genetic switches, scientists have literally reset old cells to a youthful state. In mice, damaged optic nerves have been restored, vision regained. It's like rolling back the biological clock. Now pause for a moment. If this sounds like science fiction, it isn't. Human trials already underway. There are people right now, real patients, receiving these treatments. Some researchers believe the first human to live to 120, in good health, is alive today. Maybe even watching this video. But here's where the detective story takes a darker turn. With every breakthrough comes a new question. Who gets it? If these therapies remain expensive, will they become toys for the wealthy, letting the rich live to 120 while the rest of us die at 70? Will we see a new divide, not just between rich and poor, but between the long-lived and the short-lived? And even if we solve the cost problem, what about power? Imagine politicians clinging to office for 80 years straight. Imagine corporate leaders running companies for a century. What happens to society when lifespans stretch, but not everyone agrees on how to handle it? That's the tension of death-stopping tech. It's coming, faster than most of us realize. And it has the potential to transform not just our bodies, but our economies, our families, and even our sense of what it means to be human. So the real question isn't, can we stop aging? The science suggests we can. The real question is, should we? And if we should, who gets to decide how long we live? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, we'll explore exactly how close we are to stopping death and what that future will look like for you, your children, and the world we all share. Imagine you and I standing in a grocery aisle jammed with choices, and I whisper that the real puzzle is whether more of everything actually makes people happier, or whether it simply fills shelves without lifting spirits. That question sits at the heart of the chapter, because an economy can grow briskly, raise output per person, and still leave citizens unsure whether life satisfaction has advanced or only the count of transactions has multiplied. A thoughtful scholar even noted that wealth soared in his country while reported happiness fell, suggesting competition preoccupies us, whereas generosity and cooperation may nourish contentment more reliably than another notch on the income ladder. Before we chase clues, I separate two related ideas. Because happiness swings with daily events, while well-being reflects basics like health, education, shelter, skills, and work, allowing steadier measurement than moods buffeted by life's everyday weather. Surveys ask people to rate their usual happiness on simple scales. Then compare those answers with income, age, occupation, beliefs, and background, yielding patterns that complicate the easy assumption that more money automatically equals more smiles. One landmark investigation found little link between national income and reported happiness across countries, and later work showed gains for the very poor and very rich within societies, yet far weaker connections for everyone clustered between those extremes. It also helps to remember that temperament and culture shape outlooks. Since some people inherit sunnier dispositions and different communities approach faith, work, and security in ways that quietly tilt satisfaction long before paychecks are counted. At a household level, joy rises as families approach a comfortable threshold that covers food, clothing, and shelter, then flattens as incomes climb higher because worry recedes as sufficiency, while appetite expands endlessly when comparison becomes the scoreboard. So I shift the lens from feelings to well-being, which rests on clear pillars like nutrition, housing, health, education, skills, and meaningful work. A foundation we can actually track without confusing a tough week with a failing system. Even here, envy and purpose intrude, because status comparisons can sour contentment despite comfort. And a life missing mission, growth, or connection may leave people restless, even when necessities are not in question. This is why leaning only on output hides too much, since spreading gains unevenly can raise totals while widening gaps. And recording more goods says nothing about whether their quality improves lives or simply expands inventory. Some increases even crowd out well-being, because more cigarettes, extra litigation, feverish financial churn, redundant brands, and stockpiles of weapons can swell accounts without nourishing safety, trust, or health in any meaningful or durable sense. Other costs hide in the margins as pollution, congestion, and longer hours silently follow growth, reducing leisure and breathing room. Which reminds us that arithmetic without context can flatter results nobody truly experiences as better daily lives. We still must judge outcomes against poverty and inequality, because averages conceal distributions, and a nation can feel prosperous on paper while leaving significant shares of its people short of security, dignity, and a fair chance to advance. Because these limitations are stubborn, I also study an alternative dashboard that a small Himalayan kingdom proposed, one that tracks happiness alongside income by weighing culture, governance, environment, and sustainable development rather than assuming purchases alone define progress. Another analyst suggested mapping wellness across economics, environment, physical health, mental health, workplaces, social cohesion, and civic life. A portrait that helps leaders notice when rising output hides declining contentment or eroding conditions in communities. Sometimes the story moves backward as longer hours, dual incomes pressed by necessity, and shrinking free time leave families strained, while a competitive race to outshine neighbors fuels purchases that satisfy status more than lasting contentment. Scholars warn that chasing material markers as primary goals correlates with anxiety, depression, drug use, and even physical ailments, which does not mean shopping cannot lift moods briefly, only that consumption rarely anchors durable satisfaction by itself. So I highlight alternate routes that many people find sustaining, including devotion to art, culture, and faith, service to others through generosity and volunteering, and a deliberate simplicity that reduces needs and clarifies priorities without glorifying deprivation. Creators and supporters together build the culture that nourishes meaning, because patrons and audiences allow artists, architects, and composers to thrive, and communities diminish when fewer citizens have means or appetite to sustain such work. Likewise, people who help after disasters, share time, and exhibit empathy remind us that prosocial behavior deepens well-being for givers and receivers, strengthening neighborhoods in ways monetary totals never fully capture. When I return to policy, the destination feels clear, because a healthy system should pursue broad happiness and well-being, eliminate poverty, enable potential, and still respect aspiration, with responsible credit supporting purchases without luring households into unsustainable burdens. Affluence and premium goods will still inspire effort, but the promise must be balanced by fair opportunity and protections that prevent extreme concentration from eroding. Participation, legitimacy, and the hope that today's toil buys tomorrow's genuinely better life. In the end, the case points beyond the scoreboard toward the lives underneath, insisting that prosperity counts only when it enlarges human possibilities, steadies families, protects nature, and leaves us feeling that our busy days add up to something worthy. We reached the final room in our investigation, and I steadied my breath like a detective before a door, asking whether the system we built can truly serve both prosperity and dignity. I wrote this journey to understand the engine running most economies, because capitalism dominates daily life, promises innovation and value, and yet carries faults I believe we can address with grounded, workable remedies that improve lives. The twist is that its troubles do not stand alone like isolated suspects, because each one knows the others, and they conspire as a ring, passing influence from one problem to the next without ever leaving fingerprints. Poverty leans into inequality. Inequality drags demand. Weak demand swells joblessness. Joblessness sparks quarrels over austerity and stimulus. And those fights meet lobbying that whispers in corridors where votes tilt away from regulation or stronger environmental guardrails. That chain reaction explains why touching one lever moves 5 others, because efforts to raise pay floors might also push fragile firms to shutter, trim shifts, or shift sourcing abroad, thinning local payrolls while imports quietly expand their footprint. You can picture a room of lawmakers voting on a single headline issue, tidy and televised, while the web of connections remains offstage. And easier short-term fixes eclipse the patient work that prevents tomorrow's emergency from ambushing everyone. That habit creates a loop-in soundtrack of urgent problems, because when we avoid deeper repairs, we invite recurring breakdowns, and the short view charges interest that long-term thinking could have saved if taken seriously earlier and sustained steadily. Some people throw up their hands at this complexity and call the case unsolvable, but I refuse despair because enough thoughtful, skilled, and determined citizens exist to assemble practical answers if we commit to open, sustained collaboration. Every remedy deserves debate, revision, and careful testing, since sketches on paper require craftsmanship in the field, and proposals must respect trade-offs while still aiming past caution toward measurable gains in security, opportunity, and everyday breathing room. I want you to feel this not as policy theater, but as neighborhood life, where fair work, decent pay, reliable schools, and clean air shape mornings, dinners, and dreams more than any statistics scrolling across a news ticker. That is why I keep choosing optimism rooted in action rather than slogans, because realism without hope freezes the hands, while hope without realism floats away, and neither posture fixes a roof before the storm returns. If this sounds like asking the system to grow a conscience, it is more practical than that, since aligned incentives, transparent rules, and thoughtful design can make responsibility the easiest path rather than a noble detour. We have walked past 14 doors together, and each opened onto rooms crowded with causes, consequences, and choices, reminding us that piecemeal repairs without coordination risk tripping wires we never intended to touch while fixing something important nearby. So the method changes from shouting at villains to mapping systems, testing sequences, and learning which order of steps turn strain into momentum. Because a thoughtful cascade can transform feedback loops that previously amplified harm into steadying signals. Think of it like renovating a busy house, where replacing a beam requires bracing other rooms. Because strength comes from coordination more than heroics, and the plan matters as much as the courage to swing the hammer. That is also why single-issue votes feel tidy yet prove treacherous, since the most visible lever often hides 3 unseen pulleys. And the choice that gratifies tonight can cost opportunities we urgently need next season. When you and I talk about raising incomes, we cannot ignore competitive pressures, import dynamics, and technology's trajectory. And when we talk about safety or sustainability, we must also reckon with jobs, prices, and the budgets households actually navigate. None of this means paralysis. It means choreography, which is simply disciplined movement with purpose. And policy can dance when leaders respect interdependence, measure outcomes honestly, and resist the temptation to declare victory after only the first chorus. I keep faith because I have met leaders who would rather build bridges than barricades, citizens who prefer candor to comfort, and communities that prove, again and again, that collaboration scales better than outrage when stakes climb. The destination is bigger than income statements and election cycles, because material progress without moral and spiritual well-being leaves rooms furnished and hearts underfed. And I want a system that grows both pantry and purpose together. Call it an economy that earns trust, one where families feel stability spreading through work and neighborhoods, where opportunity rides the bus to every district, and where rules encourage initiative while insisting that success strengthen the commons. You will hear arguments that the challenge is too tangled, yet history keeps surprising pessimists when determined people choose patience over panic, and incremental wins compound like savings, turning yesterday's experiments into tomorrow's quiet normal. That is why I leave you with a simple image rather than a complicated chart, a light switched on in a hallway that once felt dangerous, revealing doors we can unlock together with steady, neighborly hands. The next steps are not glamorous because they involve tending institutions, refining incentives, and staying with problems longer than headlines do. But that is precisely how systems learn, and how communities become durable rather than merely lucky. If this book has done its job, it has offered starting points, not commandments, because sketches invite improvement, and I would rather join a conversation that builds than deliver a proclamation that hardens before testing. I trust your judgment more than any slogan, and I believe your voice belongs in rooms where rules form, budgets balance, and priorities align. Since democracy works best when citizens practice stewardship rather than consumption alone. So let us leave this room with sleeves rolled, knowing every improvement touches 5 others, and that our measure of success is families steadier, streets kinder, air clearer, and futures brighter than the ones we feared yesterday. Imagine standing on a barren earth nearly 4 billion years ago. No trees, no animals, no birds in the sky. Just oceans of chemicals sloshing under a violent atmosphere of lightning, volcanic gases, and chaos. The question that haunted me as a scientist, and now as your guide, is this. How did life, fragile and improbable, claw its way out of that chaos? And what does that origin story tell us about why we age today? The detective trail begins not with humans, but with the simplest of organisms, tiny protocells that formed in shallow pools and volcanic vents. Picture fatty bubbles floating on water, carrying strands of RNA, primitive instructions for survival. They weren't alive in the way we think of it now, no brains, no lungs, no beating hearts. But they had something revolutionary, the ability to copy themselves. Replication was the first spark of life. From that spark, evolution had its raw material. These early cells lived precariously. Imagine a neighborhood where houses are built of straw, roofs leak in the rain, and every gust of wind threatens collapse. Most of those first life forms perish, but some had an edge, survival circuits. When the environment grew hostile, drought, starvation, radiation, these cells switched off growth and reproduction, conserving energy, repairing themselves until conditions improved. That balancing act between growth and survival became the template for all life, from microbes to mammals. Here's the detective clue. Those ancient survival circuits are still inside us. They're why our bodies can hunker down during fasting, why exercise sharpens resilience, why adversity often strengthens us. They're the genetic inheritance of billions of years of struggle. But they also hold the seeds of aging. Fast forward to more complex organisms. Evolution favored species that could reproduce successfully, passing on their genes. Natural selection, however, didn't care much about what happened after reproduction. If you survived long enough to have offspring, you had done your job in evolutionary terms. Genes that helped early survival and reproduction were preserved, even if they caused harm later. That's why some biological programs that once helped us in youth now turn against us with age. It's like inheriting a house with clever wiring that kept the lights on in storms, but now shorts out every time you plug in a new appliance. For centuries, scientists tried to explain aging through this evolutionary lens. Peter Medawar suggested that harmful mutations expressing themselves late in life accumulate because natural selection can't weed them out. J.B.S. Haldane argued similarly, pointing to conditions like Huntington's disease that appear after reproduction, persisting in populations because they don't affect reproductive success. Later, Thomas Kirkwood proposed the disposable soma theory, the idea that organisms have limited resources and must choose between reproduction and maintenance. Mice, constantly hunted, invest in rapid reproduction at the cost of long-term repair. Tortoises, relatively safe, invest more in longevity. But while these theories explain why organisms age, they didn't explain how. What physically breaks down? What mechanism inside the cell fails? Was it mutations in DNA, damage from free radicals, telomere shortening, or something else? The search for the biological culprit became the central mystery. The DNA mutation theory seemed promising. Over time, radiation, toxins, and errors in copying DNA could accumulate, corrupting the genetic code. Yet experiments undermined this view. If mutations alone drove aging, then cloning from an old cell should produce an old organism. But Dolly the sheep, cloned from the mammary gland of a 6-year-old Away, was born young and healthy. The genetic information was intact. The problem lay elsewhere. Then came the free radical theory. Free radicals are unstable molecules that damage DNA proteins and membranes. They seem the logical villain tiny wrecking balls bouncing through the cell. Antioxidants were hailed as potential cures. But large studies showed that antioxidants didn't extend lifespan in humans. In some cases, they even worsened outcomes. Free radicals were troublemakers, yes, but not the mastermind. Telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes, offered another lead. With each cell division, telomeres shortened, eventually signaling the cell to stop dividing. It looked like a biological clock counting down. But again, the story didn't hold across all cases. Scientists eventually cataloged what they called the hallmarks of aging: DNA instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic drift, mitochondrial dysfunction, senescent cells, stem cell exhaustion, altered communication. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but none alone explained the whole picture. That's where my own work pointed to something different: information loss. DNA is digital robust, stable, like a book whose letters don't fade. The epigenome, by contrast, is analog chemical marks and structures that decide which genes are active. Over time, that system erodes. Information doesn't disappear. It gets scrambled. Cells forget their identity. A liver cell no longer functions perfectly as a liver cell. A neuron loses sharpness. The result isn't catastrophic collapse, but gradual disorganization aging. Here's the thrilling part. If aging is information loss, then youth isn't destroyed. It's just buried. The instructions for being young are still there, hidden under noise. The challenge is to find ways to restore them. Just as scratches on a DVD can be polished away to reveal the movie beneath, maybe the scratches of aging can be repaired. Think of where we are in history. A century ago, cancer was a mystery, treated cruelly with surgery and poisons. Then scientists discovered oncogeny-specific genetic switches driving tumor growth. Suddenly, cancer became a solvable problem, not an unknowable curse. Aging is at the same pivot point. Once seen as an unstoppable fate, it's now revealing itself as a solvable mystery with clear suspects and pathways. This reframing changes everything. Aging isn't a vague fog, but a process with levers we can find and pull. It means interventions, diet, exercise, molecules, reprogramming can target the very core of the problem, not just symptoms. It means that the decline we've always accepted as inevitable may, in fact, be optional. But the detective trail doesn't stop at cells. The implications stretch into every corner of life: healthcare, families, economies, culture. If the body's clock can be slowed or even reset, society will face questions more profound than any we've asked before. But those questions belong to later chapters. For now, the key revelation is this: aging is not a preordained script. It is a process rooted in survival circuits and information loss, and processes can be altered. So the curtain rises on the real story. From primordial pools to modern hospitals, the mystery of aging has been misunderstood as fate. But the evidence is piling up. Aging is not the villain we thought. It is the side effect of ancient survival programs, corrupted over time. And if that's true, then the future is wide open. The first chapter closes with the detective case still alive. If aging is information loss, then the next step is clear. We must learn how to restore that information, how to polish the record, how to make the music of youth play again. Imagine a grand concert hall, velvet curtains pulled back, the audience hushed in anticipation. At center stage sits a pianist, once a virtuoso, hands poised above the keys. The opening notes are strong and clear, the melody familiar. But then something shifts. Notes are missed. Harmonies collapse. The performance turns chaotic. The music hasn't been lost, the sheet still rests on the stand, but the pianist can no longer read it properly. That, in essence, is what aging does to our cells. The instructions remain, but the performance falters. This chapter's detective case begins with the pianist, the genome and the epigenome working together. The genome is the sheet music, unchanging, precise. The epigenome is the pianist, deciding when to play, how loudly, with what tempo. Early in life, the performance is crisp. But over decades, scratches appear on the sheet, the lighting dims, the pianist's vision blurs. The result is not silence, but cacophony cells still play, but out of sync. Aging is not the loss of music, but the distortion of its reading. To understand this, let's go back to yeast. In my early career, I studied how these simple organisms age. Yeast are remarkable because, though tiny, they replicate many of the processes found in humans. What we discovered was astonishing. Some yeast cells live twice as long as others, depending on the activity of certain genes. The key players were sirtuins, proteins that act like guardians, preserving epigenetic order. When sirtuins were active, yeast cells stayed youthful longer. When they were absent, chaos set in quickly. It was as though some pianists had sharper eyesight and steadier hands, able to keep the music flowing for more years. But here's the twist. Sirtuins aren't always free to guard the music. When DNA breaks, which happens thousands of times a day, sirtuins rush to repair the damage. In doing so, they leave their posts at the epigenetic keyboard. When they return, sometimes they don't resume playing exactly where they left off. Over years, these little misplacements accumulate. The pianist begins to misread the score. The music of youth grows distorted. This realization reframes DNA damage. It's not just about mutations in the code. The more profound effect is disruption of the epigenetic performance. Every repair, every stress is like pulling the pianist away from the piano, only for them to return slightly more confused. Over decades, the harmony of life turns into noise aging itself. One vivid clue came from experiments in mice. By deliberately creating breaks in their DNA without introducing mutations, we could accelerate aging. The mice grew frail, their organs deteriorated, their fur grayed. It was as if we had fast-forwarded the clock. But here's the hopeful part. If the problem was disrupted performance, then maybe it could be reset. By activating certain genes, the mice's tissues regain youth. The pianists, given better lighting and a clearer score, found their rhythm again. The performance improved. This isn't just theory. It explains why lifestyle has such a profound effect on aging. Exercise, fasting, exposure to mild stress, these don't change the genetic score. They sharpen the pianist. They keep sirtuins active, and a D+ levels high, the performance crisp. Conversely, a life of constant comfort overeating, inactivity, dims the lights, dulls the senses, and speeds decline. The detective clue is clear. How we live shapes how well our pianist reads the score. The metaphor also explains why cloning works. Take the nucleus from an old cell, insert it into an egg, and out comes a young organism. The genetic music is intact. What's reset is the pianist. The epigenetic marks are reprogrammed. The performance begins anew. Youth isn't lost with age. It's hidden beneath the noise. Think about what this means. For centuries, humans believed aging was irreversible, a one-way march toward decline. But if the genome is stable and the epigenome is restorable, then aging is not fixed. It's a performance error, a solvable problem. The sheet music is still there. The task is to teach the pianist to read it again. This theory unifies the hallmarks of aging. Telomere shortening, mitochondrial dysfunction, protein misfolding, senescent cells, they all stem from disrupted gene expression. If the pianist loses their place, the mitochondria stop producing energy efficiently, proteins fold incorrectly, cells forget when to divide or die. The chaos spreads because the conductor has lost control. Fix the conductor, and the orchestra falls back into harmony. It also explains why adversity helps. When food is scarce or energy low, sirtuins and other guardians step up, sharpening the performance. It's as if the pianist, challenged by a more complex piece, pays closer attention, reads the score more carefully. Stress, in moderation, keeps the system honed. Comfort, ironically, dulls it. But here lies the suspense. Can we truly restore the pianist once decline has set in? Early experiments suggest yes. Reprogramming cells with carefully chosen factors has reversed aging in tissues, restoring function. The danger, of course, is going too far erasing identity, creating tumors. The challenge is precision, rejuvenation without erasure, clarity without chaos. It's like tuning an old piano, careful not to snap the strings while restoring the melody. The story of the demented pianist is not just biology, it's a metaphor for human life. When young, our performance is sharp, the melody strong. As we age, distractions pull us away, our rhythm falters, but deep down, the music never vanishes. With the right help, it can be played again. This chapter leaves us with a thrilling detective clue. Aging is not the destruction of the score, but the corruption of its reading. If we can find ways to restore the pianist, to clear the noise, then perhaps the performance of life can continue longer. And so the mystery deepens. The score is intact, the pianist falters, and the challenge ahead is clear. How do we retrain the performer? Not just for a few extra notes, but for entire new movements of the symphony. Picture walking through a crowded city street at rush hour. Cars honk, trains screech, people push past each other with hurried steps. At first, everything seems normal, just the bustle of life. But then you realize there's a silent epidemic unfolding. Hidden in plain sight, people are getting sick, frail, or forgetful not because of bad luck, but because of the same underlying process, aging itself. We talk about cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's as separate catastrophes, but they're really different disguises worn by the same culprit. For much of medical history, doctors treated diseases one at a time. Heart disease was one puzzle, diabetes another, Alzheimer's yet another. Hospitals became battlegrounds, each ward fighting a different enemy. But as lifespans grew, a pattern emerged. Almost all the major killers struck hardest in old age. Cancer rarely devastates children, but it haunts the elderly. Alzheimer's is virtually unknown among the young. Diabetes, arthritis, frailty all rise steeply with age. The clue was obvious, yet medicine kept missing it. Aging itself is the common risk factor. Take heart disease. Plaques build up in arteries, blood vessels stiffen, and the heart grows less resilient. These changes don't strike at 20 or 30. They strike after decades of wear. Cancer, too, is fundamentally an age-related disease. Cells accumulate errors, but more importantly, the guardians that once corrected those errors falter with age. Alzheimer's is no different. Protein waste builds up in the brain. Neurons lose their clarity, but only when aging has eroded the repair systems. These diseases aren't independent mysteries. They are symptoms of one deeper problem. The detective clue here is striking. If aging is the biggest risk factor, then treating aging could prevent all these diseases at once. That flips medicine on its head. Instead of whack-a-mole, one drug for cancer, another for diabetes, another for dementia, we go upstream. We stop the flood at its source. Evidence for this shift has been building for decades. Consider calorie restriction, one of the most consistent ways to extend lifespan in animals. Restrict calories without malnutrition, and mice live longer. Worms, flies, even monkeys benefit. What's remarkable isn't just the extra years, but the healthier years. Cancer is delayed, diabetes reduced, cognitive decline slowed. One intervention protects against many diseases at once. That wouldn't happen if these diseases were independent. It happens because aging itself is slowed. Or look at drugs like metformin. Originally developed for diabetes, it not only regulates blood sugar but also lowers rates of heart disease and cancer, and may even extend lifespan. Rapamycin, an immune suppressant used for transplants, extends lifespan in mice and reduces a wide range of age-related illnesses. These weren't designed as longevity drugs, yet they act broadly because they hit the root cause. The detective case grows clearer. Target aging and you target disease itself. This has profound implications for public health. Right now, billions are spent managing the fallout of aging, treating one disease after another in the last decades of life. Hospitals are filled with patients not because they were unlucky, but because they were old. If we shift the focus, if we treat aging as a disease, we could compress morbidity, extend health spans so people live long, active lives, then decline quickly at the very end. Fewer years of frailty, more years of vitality. The dream isn't immortality. It's a better life before death. Yet society remains blind to this epidemic. Public health campaigns focus on smoking, diet, and exercise, all important, but they don't name aging as a central culprit. Medical systems are structured around billing codes for individual diseases, not for aging. Regulators don't yet recognize aging as a treatable condition. The epidemic hides in plain sight, unaddressed not because it's invisible, but because we've chosen not to see it. Consider the paradox. If a new virus emerged at increased risk of cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's by 1,000%, the world would mobilize instantly. Headlines would scream, governments would pour billions into research, and societies would demand solutions. But that virus already exists. It's called aging. We've simply normalized it, treating its devastation as unavoidable. That normalization is the real blindness. The cost of this blindness is staggering. Trillions of dollars go to late-life care, propping up failing systems rather than preventing failure in the first place. Families are torn apart as loved ones slip into dementia. Not because it's fate, but because we haven't addressed the root. The detective story here has a bitter irony. The culprit is obvious, but we refuse to put it on trial. But change is coming. Scientists are pushing for trials that test drugs not just for single diseases, but for aging itself. The TAME trial targeting aging with metformin is designed to see whether the drug can delay multiple age-related conditions at once. If successful, it could change how regulators view aging, finally recognizing it as a treatable process. That recognition would open floodgates. Funding, drug development, clinical applications. The epidemic would no longer be invisible. This shift also reframes how we view prevention. Right now, preventive medicine means lowering cholesterol or blood sugar, vaccinating against infections, or screening for cancers. In the future, prevention could mean slowing the clock itself. Doctors might prescribe therapies to keep your biological age lower, delaying all diseases together. Health span becomes the central metric, not just disease-free survival. The detective story is reaching a turning point. We began by seeing aging as background noise, then recognized it as the conductor of disease. Now we see it as a solvable problem, with interventions already showing promise. The blind epidemic isn't blindness of biology, it's blindness of perspective. We've refused to treat aging because we assumed it was untouchable, but the evidence keeps pointing in the same direction. Aging is not destiny, it's biology. And biology can be changed. Imagine the world that could follow. Hospitals no longer dominated by geriatric wards. Families no longer watching loved ones fade for decades. Societies no longer bankrupted by late-life care. Instead, people living longer, healthier lives, contributing wisdom and creativity well into their second century. The epidemic doesn't end in tragedy. It ends in possibility. But we're not there yet. The blindness persists. The systems of medicine, regulation, and culture still cling to old models. The detective case leaves us with this cliffhanger. Will society choose to open its eyes and confront aging head-on? Or will we keep patching symptoms while the root cause grows unchecked? Picture a dimly lit laboratory, fluorescent bulbs humming overhead, cages of mice lying neatly on metal racks. At first glance, nothing extraordinary is happening, just tiny animals scurrying about. But in reality, these rooms are where the future of human longevity is being mapped out. Each mouse, each test tube, each DNA strand carries a clue to the central mystery. Can we intervene in aging right now? Not in some distant future, but today. This chapter follows the trail of those experiments and the surprising lessons they've already taught us. The first major clue comes from calorie restriction. For decades, scientists noticed that animals fed fewer calories but not malnourished lived longer, healthier lives. Mice on calorie restriction avoided cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, living far past their peers. Even monkeys showed improved health. It was as if scarcity flipped a switch, activating survival circuits that conserved energy and repaired damage. Evolution had wired life to survive lean times, and in doing so, it gave us the ability to stretch lifespan. But here's the catch. Almost no one wants to live hungry forever. Calorie restriction in humans is grueling, unsustainable for most. That raised the detective question. Could we mimic the effects of calorie restriction without the misery? Could molecules or lifestyle tweaks trigger the same survival pathways? That's where nutrient-sensing pathways enter the stage enter, AMPK, and the sirtuins. They're the levers that shift cells between growth and repair. In abundance, mTOR shouts for growth, but when inhibited through fasting or drugs like rapamycin, it promotes maintenance. AMPK acts as the energy gauge, sensing when fuel is low, triggering fat burning and efficiency. Sirtuins, powered by NAD, coordinate DNA repair and epigenetic stability. Together, they form the ancient survival circuit that calorie restriction activates. Early evidence shows we can manipulate these pathways now. Rapamycin, first used to suppress the immune system in transplants, extends lifespan in mice by slowing mTOR. Metformin, a cheap diabetes drug, activates MPK and shows signs of lowering rates of cancer and heart disease. And AD boosters like NMN and NR increase sirtuin activity, rejuvenating cells in animal studies. These aren't sci-fi fantasies. They're real interventions already tested in humans for other conditions. One striking experiment involved old mice given NMN within a week. Their muscles behaved like those of young mice, their endurance restored. It was as if decades of decline were reversed overnight. Another study showed rapamycin improving immune function in elderly humans, a tantalizing hint that what works in animals might translate to us. These clues point to a simple but radical truth. Longevity science isn't about the distant future. It's happening now. Think about what that means in practical terms. Right now, people are already taking metformin, rapamycin, and AD+ boosters, not just for disease, but for longevity. They're running self-experiments, tracking biomarkers, trying to stay ahead of the curve. While regulators debate whether aging is a disease, individuals are acting on the evidence that exists. The movement isn't waiting for official approval, it's unfolding in real time. Of course, this raises ethical and safety questions. The long-term effects of these interventions in healthy humans are still uncertain. Could rapamycin's immune suppression cause harm? Could NAD boosters have unintended side effects? Could pushing the body's survival circuits too far backfire? The detective work is still in progress, but the evidence so far is encouraging. In moderation, these pathways can be nudged safely. Another avenue is hormesis, the idea that small doses of stress strengthen the body. Exercise is the classic example. By straining muscles and depleting energy, it activates AMPK and sirtuins, triggering repair. Fasting does the same, stressing the body just enough to activate survival mode. Even plant molecules like resveratrol or spermidine act as mild stressors, nudging cells into repair. It's like a fire drill, stressful in the moment, but preparing the system for real threats. These are interventions available right now. No lab required. The detective trail also reveals why modern life accelerates aging. Constant abundance, endless food, little physical hardship, constant comfort keeps survival circuits dormant. We've designed a world where the pianist never faces a challenging score, and so their skills dull. Longevity now means reintroducing adversity in measured doses, waking the ancient guardians inside us. There's a social layer too. If longevity interventions already exist, who gets access? Metformin is cheap and widely available, but newer therapies may not be. And AD boosters, for instance, are already marketed as supplements at high prices, often beyond the reach of ordinary people. The danger is a two-tier system. The wealthy extending their health span, while the poor continue suffering from the blind epidemic of aging. Ensuring fair access will be as crucial as the science itself. Yet the detective evidence is overwhelming. Aging is not untouchable. We can act now. Lifestyle, exercise, fasting, avoiding constant abundance already slows the clock. Drugs, metformin, rapamycin, NAD plus boosters show promise in delaying decline. These aren't futuristic dreams, but present-day tools. The challenge is scaling them safely, equitably, and effectively. Imagine the impact if society embraced this. Instead of hospitals packed with frail patients, we'd see decades of added vitality. Instead of careers ending in midlife, people could reinvent themselves multiple times. Instead of fearing slow decline, families could share long years of strength and clarity. The epidemic of aging would no longer be silent, it would be in retreat. But we're still at a crossroads. The science is clear enough to act, yet cultural inertia slows progress. Regulators don't yet classify aging as a disease. Funding remains fragmented. Most people don't even realize interventions already exist. The detective case leaves us with this suspense. Will we seize longevity now, or will we waste decades waiting for perfect certainty? The chapter closes with urgency. The tools are in our hands. The evidence is here. Longevity is not a far-off dream. It's unfolding today. The only question is whether we have the vision to recognize it and the courage to use it. Imagine standing in a pharmacy aisle, shelves stacked high with colorful bottles promising energy, beauty, or health. Multivitamins, antioxidants, herbal supplements, all claiming to add vitality to your life. Most of them, if we're honest, are little more than expensive hope in a bottle. But what if among these pills there were a few that genuinely touch the machinery of aging? What if instead of patching symptoms, a pill could actually slow the clock itself? This chapter asks the detective question, can we swallow longevity? The story begins with one of the most surprising suspects, metformin. First approved in the 1950s as a treatment for type 2 diabetes, it's cheap, widely available, and remarkably safe. For decades, it was prescribed to regulate blood sugar. But scientists began noticing something unusual. Diabetics on metformin often live not just longer than other diabetics, but in some cases longer than healthy individuals not taking it. That didn't fit the expected script. Why would a drug designed for one disease extend life across the board? The clue was clear. Metformin wasn't just treating diabetes, it was nudging deeper survival pathways. The mechanism links back to nutrient sensing. Metformin activates AMPK, the cellular energy gauge, tricking cells into thinking they're under mild stress. That shifts the body from growth mode to repair mode, the same survival state triggered by fasting or exercise. In other words, metformin mimics scarcity, activating ancient longevity circuits without the need to starve. That makes it one of the most promising candidates for a true longevity pill. But metformin isn't alone. Rapamycin, discovered on Easter Island, tells a similar story. Initially prized for its ability to suppress the immune system during organ transplants, it was later found to inhibit mTOR, the growth pathway. In mice, rapamycin extended lifespan significantly, even when given late in life. What's remarkable is its broad effect: fewer cancers, better heart function, improved immune response. Again, one pill targeting many diseases at once because it strikes at the root aging itself. Then there are the NA boosters, like NMN and NR. These compounds increase the levels of NAD, the molecule sirtuins need to function. As we age, Na+ levels fall, weakening the guardians of our epigenome. Restoring Na+ reawakens those protectors, improving DNA repair, energy production, and stress resistance. In animal studies, NAD boosters rejuvenated muscles, improve metabolism, and even reverse aspects of age-related decline. Early human trials suggest similar benefits. Unlike many supplements, these molecules are tied to clear, testable biology. Other compounds add to the detective lineup. Resveratrol, found in red wine, was once hailed as the key to the French paradox: why wine-drinking populations had lower rates of heart disease. It activates sirtuins, though its effects in humans are less clear. Spermidine, found in foods like soy and mushrooms, promotes autophagy, the recycling of cellular waste. Each of these molecules taps into the same survival pathways evolution gave us. They're not magic bullets, but they're nudges, small adjustments that keep the system sharper for longer. The question is not whether these compounds can affect aging. They clearly can in animals, but how well they translate to humans, and how safely. Clinical trials are underway. The TAME trial, designed to test metformin's ability to delay multiple age-related diseases, is a landmark effort. If it succeeds, regulators may finally recognize aging itself as a treatable target. That shift would transform medicine, opening the door for dozens of new interventions. But here's the suspense. Longevity pills challenge our entire idea of healthcare. Right now, drugs are approved to treat diseases after they appear. A pill that prevents aging doesn't fit that model. It doesn't treat cancer, heart disease, or dementia. It lowers the risk of all of them simultaneously. That makes it harder to test, harder to regulate, harder to fund. Yet the payoff is enormous. Instead of patching leaks one by one, we replace the entire roof. This also raises cultural questions. If safe, effective longevity pills exist, who gets them? Will they be prescription only, limited to the wealthy? Or will they be treated like vaccines, distributed widely as public health measures? The answer will shape society as much as the science. A world where only the rich live long, healthy lives is a dystopia. The detective trail also uncovers a cautionary note. Not all compounds marketed as anti-aging are effective. The supplement industry is filled with exaggerations, undertested molecules, and outright scams. People desperate to live longer often waste money or even harm themselves. That's why rigorous trials are essential. Longevity is too important to leave to marketing. It must be grounded in science, yet the optimism is real. For the first time, we have candidates with real biological plausibility, proven effects in animals, and early evidence in humans. Metformin, rapamycin, NAD boosters, these aren't vague promises but concrete tools. They're the first draft of what future longevity medicine might look like. And they're here now, not centuries away. Think about the impact of even modest progress. If a pill could extend health span by 5 or 10 years, that would mean millions fewer cases of Alzheimer's, billions saved in healthcare costs, families spared decades of suffering. That's not science fiction, it's within reach. The detective case isn't solved yet, but the first suspects have been identified, and the evidence is strong. This changes how we think about aging. It's no longer an untouchable fate. It's a process with levers, and pills may be some of the first tools to pull them. Just as antibiotics revolutionized medicine by targeting infection, longevity pills could revolutionize it by targeting aging. The chapter leaves us with both hope and challenge. The hope is that swallowing a pill could one day keep us younger longer, protecting against the blind epidemic of age-related disease. The challenge is ensuring safety, access, and fairness as these tools move from lab to pharmacy. The detective story continues, but the direction is clear. A better pill is coming, and it could change everything. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff, wind whipping at your face, the ocean stretching endlessly below. Behind you lies the familiar ground of medicine, as we know it, disease treated one by one, old age accepted as fate. Ahead, across the gulf, lies a world where aging itself is treated, where decline is delayed, even reversed. The question is not whether we'll try to cross, but how and how soon. This chapter maps the big steps humanity must take to move from possibility to practice. The first step is recognition. Right now, most medical systems don't classify aging as a disease. Doctors treat its consequences, heart attacks, strokes, dementia, but not the root cause. Regulators approve drugs only for specific conditions, not for aging itself. That's like fixing cracks in a dam while ignoring the rising water behind it. If aging remains invisible in policy, progress will always be piecemeal. The first big step is reframing aging as a treatable condition, worthy of the same focus as cancer or infection. The second step is proof. Scientists must show convincingly that targeting aging works in humans, not just mice. That's why the TAME trial, testing metformin for its ability to delay multiple age-related diseases, is so crucial. If it succeeds, it could provide the evidence regulators need to accept aging as a valid medical target. The leap from lab animals to humans is always perilous, but it's the bridge we must cross. The third step is safety. Any intervention that alters fundamental biology carries risks. Rapamycin extends lifespan in animals, but suppresses the immune system at high doses. And AD boosters rejuvenate tissues, but may, in theory, feed cancer cells. Reprogramming cells reverses aging, but risks erasing identity. The detective challenge is precision finding the balance where we reap benefits without triggering harm. That requires careful trials, long-term monitoring, and humility about what we don't yet know. Yet even as science works through these steps, individuals are moving ahead. Around the world, people already take metformin, rapamycin, or NMN off-label, guided by early evidence and personal risk tolerance. Some see themselves as pioneers, testing longevity interventions before official approval. Others warn this could backfire if unregulated use produces harm or discredits the field. The detective tension is clear. Progress is messy, and the line between boldness and recklessness is thin. Another big step is integration. Targeting aging isn't just about pills. It's about combining lifestyle, environment, and medicine into a coherent strategy. Exercise, fasting, plant-rich diets, and mild stressors already activate survival pathways. Drugs may amplify or mimic those effects. Reprogramming may one day reset them entirely. The future of longevity isn't one intervention but a symphony, carefully tuned to keep the body resilient for decades longer. There's also the step of access. If longevity treatments emerge but remain expensive, inequality will deepen. Imagine a world where the wealthy live to 120, in good health while the poor still die at 70, burdened by disease. The divide would fracture societies, fueling resentment and unrest. Ensuring fair distribution of longevity science is as critical as the science itself. Vaccines offer a hopeful precedent. Once expensive, they became global public goods. Longevity therapies must follow that path. The economic implications are staggering. Right now, trillions are spent managing late-life diseases. Hospitals overflow with patients suffering from multiple chronic conditions. If health span extends, those costs plummet. Healthy elders can keep working, mentoring, creating, contributing. Retirement systems, however, would need reinvention. If people live to 110 in good health, retiring at 65 makes no sense. Societies will need to rethink work, education, and the rhythm of life itself. The detective trail here shows both promise and disruption. Longer lives won't just add years. They'll reshape economies and cultures. There's also the step of responsibility. Longer lives mean longer consequences. If you expect to live another 100 years, climate change in 2100 isn't an abstract concern, it's your personal future. Pollution, sustainability, political stability, these issues become immediate. Longevity could make humans more farsighted, more invested in preserving the planet and institutions. But it could also amplify selfishness if the benefits are hoarded by a few. The direction isn't guaranteed. It depends on choices we make now. Psychology is another frontier. Humans are wired to live with mortality. Deadlines, both literal and symbolic, give urgency to our lives. What happens when those deadlines stretch? Do people drift, aimless, assuming there's always more time? Or do they use the gift of time to reinvent themselves? The detective clue from history is reassuring. When life expectancy doubled in the 20th century, humans didn't collapse into boredom. They expanded education, careers, and creativity. Longer lives didn't cheapen meaning, they broadened it. The same could happen again. Yet, the steps ahead won't be smooth. Resistance is inevitable. Some will argue that tampering with aging is unnatural, dangerous, hubristic. Others will fear overpopulation, resource strain, or cultural stagnation. These concerns are real, but they're challenges to manage, not reasons to halt progress. Every major medical advance, from anesthesia to transplants to IV faced fierce opposition before becoming normal. Longevity science will be no different. What's thrilling is how close we are. This isn't centuries away. Drugs like metformin and rapamycin exist now, and AD boosters are already in trials. Reprogramming therapies are showing results in animals. Epigenetic clocks can measure biological age with precision. The steps ahead aren't about discovery alone. They're about translation, regulation, and integration. The detective trail has already revealed the culprit. Now it's about building the tools to stop it. Picture again that cliff. Behind us lies a history of short, brutal lives, punctuated by disease and frailty. Ahead lies a world where humans might live to 100, 120, even beyond. The gap is wide, but not unbridgeable. Each step, recognition, proof, safety, access, integration brings us closer. This chapter ends not with certainty, but with momentum. The big steps are daunting, but they're in sight. For the first time in history, humanity isn't just dreaming of longer lives, it's building them. The detective case has moved from speculation to action, and the path forward is clear. The age of longevity isn't coming someday. The big steps are being taken now. Imagine walking into a bustling workshop where inventors tinker with machines, engineers sketch blueprints, and scientists test wild ideas. The air hums with possibility, like the dawn of electricity or the birth of the internet. Except this workshop isn't building gadgets, it's building the future of human longevity. This is the age of innovation, when ideas once dismissed as science fiction become tools we can hold, test, and apply. The detective question is clear. How far can innovation carry us? And what kind of future will it build? We start with biotechnology, the engine of this new era. Advances in gene editing, like CRISPR, allow scientists to cut and paste DNA with precision once unimaginable. Instead of being passengers of evolution, we become its editors. That means not just fixing single gene disorders, but potentially tweaking the survival circuits that govern aging itself. Imagine rewriting the genome to keep sirtuins active longer, or to maintain telomere length indefinitely. The tools exist. The challenge is applying them wisely. Then there's reprogramming, one of the most breathtaking breakthroughs of recent decades. By activating a handful of Yamanaka factors, adult cells can be pushed back toward a youthful state. Entire organisms may not need to be reset, just specific tissues, eyes, muscles, brains. Experiments in mice show that damaged optic nerves can regain function, even restore sight, when partially reprogrammed. The detective clue here is extraordinary. the body doesn't lose the instructions for youth. They're still there, buried beneath the noise. Innovation lies in finding safe ways to retrieve them. Synthetic biology is another frontier. Scientists are learning to design organisms with custom traits, programming cells like software. Imagine gut bacteria engineered to produce NAD boosters or immune cells programmed to clear senescent zombie cells that drive inflammation. Instead of taking pills, you might one day host living pharmacies inside your own body, constantly renewing and repairing. Wearables and digital health are part of the revolution too. Smartwatches already track heart rates and sleep cycles. Soon, sensors may continuously monitor biomarkers of aging blood sugar, inflammation, epigenetic age, sending updates to your phone. Instead of waiting for disease to appear, you'll get real-time feedback on how your lifestyle, diet, or treatments are affecting your longevity. It's like having a detective partner inside your pocket, whispering clues about your body's hidden clock. Artificial intelligence amplifies this innovation. AI can scan billions of chemical compounds, predicting which might activate sirtuins or inhibit mTOR. It can analyze genetic data, identifying subtle patterns humans would miss. Already, AI has accelerated drug discovery, compressing what once took decades into years or months. In the age of innovation, AI isn't just a tool, it's a co-detective guiding us to suspects we'd never find alone. Of course, innovation isn't only about biology and technology, it's about how societies adapt. Longer lives will demand new systems of education, work, and retirement. Lifelong learning may become the norm as people reinvent themselves across decades. Career arcs will stretch, not into single peaks, but into multiple climbs. Retirement, if it exists, will happen far later, perhaps only in the very final years. Innovation must extend beyond labs into laws, policies, and cultures. The economics of innovation are equally profound. Companies once focused on treating diseases are now investing in preventing them. Big pharma, startups, and venture capital are pouring billions into longevity research. The business case is undeniable. The market for delaying aging is larger than any single disease market. The detective case here isn't just scientific, it's financial. Where money flows, innovation follows. But innovation also raises risks. New tools can be misused. CRISPR could edit not just disease genes but traits for intelligence or appearance, deepening inequality. Reprogramming, if uncontrolled, could trigger cancer. Data from wearables could be exploited by insurers or governments. Every innovation carries both promise and peril. The challenge is governance, building systems that encourage progress while protecting against abuse. Another risk is hype. Longevity attracts dreamers, but also charlatans. Not every supplement or therapy sold in glossy ads is grounded in science. The danger is that premature claims discredit real progress, or that desperate individuals waste money or worse, harm themselves chasing unproven cures. The age of innovation requires skepticism as much as excitement. The detective must separate real clues from red herrings. Still, the momentum is undeniable. Innovation has already delivered breakthroughs once unthinkable, sequencing the human genome, editing DNA, reversing blindness in mice. The line between possible and impossible is moving faster than ever. What seems like fantasy today may be medicine tomorrow. Consider that just decades ago, heart transplants, IVF, and gene therapy were dismissed as madness. Now they're routine. The cultural implications are vast. Imagine art created by centenarians with the energy of youth. Political leaders with decades of wisdom still sharp at 90, grandparents meeting great-grandchildren while hiking or coding. Society will look nothing like it does now. Norms around family, work, and meaning will evolve in ways we can only glimpse. Innovation doesn't just extend life. It reshapes what it means to live. This chapter also reminds us that innovation is not confined to labs in wealthy nations. Global collaboration is essential. Aging affects every human in every culture. If longevity breakthroughs are shared equitably, they can reduce suffering worldwide. If hoarded, They could divide humanity into classes of long livers and short livers. The detective story here is also a moral one. Innovation must serve humanity, not fracture it. The suspense lies in speed. How quickly can discoveries move from lab to clinic? Will regulators adapt, or will bureaucracy slow progress? Will society embrace longevity, or resist it as unnatural? Innovation opens doors, but whether we walk through depends on choices made collectively. Picture again that bustling workshop of the future. Gene editors, eye systems, reprogramming therapies, wearable sensors, all humming together like instruments in a symphony. The melody they play is one humanity has long dreamed of. A life not just longer, but healthier, more vibrant, more free. The detective case has uncovered the culprit of aging. Now, innovation offers the tools to disarm it. This chapter closes with a feeling of acceleration. The age of innovation isn't coming someday. It's here, unfolding in labs, startups, clinics, and homes around the world. The only mystery left is how boldly we'll use it, and whether we'll steer it toward a brighter future for all. Imagine looking into a crystal ball, not to see a hazy fantasy, but to glimpse a future grounded in science already unfolding. The image is startling. Streets full of vigorous centenarians, workplaces where 80-year-olds launch startups, families where 5 generations gather around the same dinner table. This isn't wishful thinking. It's the logical extension of the science of longevity. The detective question is simple, yet profound. If aging can be slowed or reversed, what will society look like when time bends in our favor? Start with healthcare. Today, hospitals are overwhelmed by chronic diseases of aging cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes. Entire industries exist to manage decline, not prevent it. But in the future, medicine could pivot from reactive to proactive. Instead of treating disease after it strikes, doctors may monitor biological age, prescribing therapies that keep it low. Regular infusions of NAD boosters, safe doses of rapamycin or its successors, periodic reprogramming of tissues, these could become routine, as normal as vaccines or dental checkups. The shape of healthcare shifts from endless crisis management to continuous optimization. Consider education and careers. The current life script study in youth, work in middle age, retire in old age was built for lifespans of 70 or 80 years. Stretch that to 120 or more, and the script collapses. People will need multiple careers, retraining in their 50s, 60s, or 70s. Universities may transform into lifelong learning centers, where 80-year-olds sit beside 20-year-olds, both training for new chapters. Retirement may vanish altogether, replaced by cycles of work, reinvention, and renewal. Far from stagnation, longer lives could fuel waves of creativity, with people tackling fresh challenges across decades. Family life will transform too. Picture 4 or 5 generations alive at once, not with frail elders, but with vigorous ones. A 90-year-old might help raise great-grandchildren, not from a rocking chair, but from a hiking trail or laboratory bench. Wisdom and experience could flow across longer arcs, deepening family bonds. But challenges will rise as well. Inheritances may be delayed, resources tied up for decades. Younger generations may chafe under the weight of elders who live on and on. Balancing opportunity and responsibility across centuries will test families in new ways. The economy, too, will shift. Healthy elders will keep working, contributing taxes, mentoring younger workers, and fueling growth. Pension systems, designed for short retirements, will need reinvention. Housing markets may stretch as people live in the same home for longer. Companies will face employees who expect careers lasting not decades but centuries. Economies that embrace longevity will thrive, while those that cling to old models may collapse under the strain of outdated systems. The detective clue here is clear. Longevity won't just change biology. It will redraw the map of global power. Cultural meaning will evolve. For millennia, art, religion, and philosophy revolved around mortality. Poems mourned the brevity of life. Religions promised eternity to ease the sting of death. What happens when life itself stretches? Do people lose urgency, drifting in boredom? Or do they find deeper meaning, freed from the ticking clock? History suggests the latter. When life expectancy doubled in the last century, humans didn't lose purpose, they gained ambition. Education expanded, careers flourished, art exploded. With more time, people may not drift. They may soar, taking on projects too vast for short lives, restoring ecosystems, exploring space, writing epics that span generations. Yet risks abound. Political power may ossify if leaders cling to office for decades. Innovation could stall if older generations resist change. Inequality may widen if only the wealthy access longevity treatments, creating a world divided between long livers and short livers. The shape of things to come is not fixed. It depends on choices. If longevity is shared widely, it could usher in a renaissance. If hoarded, it could spark unrest. Environmental impact is another detective clue. Longer lives mean more consumption, more pressure on food, water, and energy. If humanity doesn't embrace sustainability, longevity could accelerate ecological collapse. Yet it could also inspire responsibility. If you expect to live another 50 years, climate change in 2100 is not your grandchildren's problem. It's yours. Longer lives might force people to care more deeply about the future, investing in preservation not out of altruism, but self-interest. Psychology will face new tests. Humans are wired to expect a finite arc: childhood, adulthood, old age. What happens when old age recedes endlessly? Do people reinvent themselves, or do they drift? Perhaps meaning will come not from urgency, but from reinvention. With a century or more, you could pursue multiple identities: doctor, artist, parent, traveler, teacher. The richness of life may grow, not shrink, as new chapters open. The detective trail hints at a paradox. Time, once scarce, may become abundant, and the challenge will be to use it wisely. Technology will reinforce the shift. AA companions may guide health choices. Wearables may monitor aging in real time. Reprogramming therapies may reset tissues like clockwork. The boundary between human and machine may blur as implants and synthetic biology enhance resilience. Longevity won't just extend human life. It will redefine what it means to be human. Societies that adapt will thrive. Those that resist will fracture. Nations that integrate longevity into healthcare, education, and economy will see citizens flourishing into their second century. Those that fail may drown in inequality, unrest, and outdated systems. The shape of the future is not predetermined. It is being built now, choice by choice, policy by policy, experiment by experiment. The detective story leaves us at a cliffhanger. We know the tools exist: metformin, rapamycin, NAD plus boosters, reprogramming. We know the pathways: sirtuins, mTOR, AMPK. We know the potential: longer, healthier lives, compressed morbidity, flourishing societies. What remains is will: political will, cultural will, personal will. The future is not a question of possibility, but of choice. Picture again that crystal ball. Inside it, you see not one future, but many. In one, longevity deepens inequality, entrenches power, and strains the planet. In another, it fuels creativity, responsibility, and renaissance. The science is the same in both. The shape of things to come depends not on the tools we build, but on how we choose to use them. Imagine standing at a crossroads where one path winds into a familiar valley: short lives, long illnesses, endless hospitals, while the other path climbs toward a new horizon, where humans live longer, healthier lives, free from many of the burdens of aging. The detective question now is not, can we change aging? The evidence says we can, but how do we move forward without losing our way? This chapter lays out the map. The first step forward is redefining aging itself. For centuries, it was seen as background noise, a natural process beyond intervention. But science now frames it differently, as a disease, or at least a treatable condition. This shift in mindset is crucial. You can't cure what you refuse to name. If aging is just natural, Society accepts decades of decline as inevitable. If aging is recognized as pathology, then delaying it becomes as valid as treating infection or cancer. The path forward begins with language. Next comes research. The detective trail has already revealed suspect sirtuins, mTOR, AMPK, telomeres, epigenetic drift. Interventions exist: calorie restriction, metformin, rapamycin, NAD plus boosters, partial reprogramming. But the evidence, though strong in animals, must be confirmed in humans. Large-scale clinical trials are essential. Without them, progress remains piecemeal, vulnerable to hype and skepticism. Trials like TAME, testing whether metformin can delay multiple diseases, could open the door. Once regulators see aging delayed in humans, the case will be undeniable. Another step is personalization. Aging doesn't unfold identically in everyone. Some people stay youthful into their 90s. Others decline in their 60s. Epigenetic clocks, which measure biological rather than chronological age, will allow medicine to tailor interventions. Instead of generic advice, eat better, exercise more, doctors could track your biological age in real time, adjusting therapies to keep it low. The path forward isn't one size fits all. It's precision longevity, tuned to each body's unique rhythm. Policy is just as critical. Right now, regulators don't approve drugs to treat aging. They only approve treatments for diseases once they've already taken hold. That forces research to design trials around narrow outcomes, slowing progress. If governments recognize aging as a legitimate target, investment will surge, approvals will accelerate, and therapies will reach the public sooner. The detective case needs not just evidence, but legal recognition to truly move forward. But the path is not just scientific and political, it's cultural. Humans must decide how to live with longer lives. Retirement, education, work, family, all will need reinvention. Retirement at 65 makes little sense if health lasts past 100. Education may become continuous, with people retraining multiple times across a century. Families will stretch across 5 or 6 generations, requiring new ways of sharing resources and responsibility. The path forward is not just about living longer, but about reshaping the very story of life. Ethics loom large. Who gets access to longevity interventions? If only the wealthy benefit, society will fracture. Imagine a world where elites live to 120, while the poor still die at 70. That dystopia is avoidable, but only if fairness is built into distribution. Just as vaccines became global public goods, so too must longevity medicine. The detective story warns us, progress without equity could create more suffering, not less. Environment is another piece of the puzzle. Longer lives mean more consumption: food, energy, resources. Without sustainability, the planet could buckle under the weight of billions living decades longer. But longevity could also inspire responsibility. If you expect to live into the next century, climate change isn't your grandchildren's problem. It's yours. Longer lives could align self-interest with stewardship, pushing humanity to care more deeply for Earth. The path forward links biology to ecology. Survival depends on both. Then there's meaning. For millennia, mortality shaped our sense of urgency. Knowing time was short, people loved fiercely, created art, sought purpose. If time stretches, do we lose meaning? History suggests otherwise. When life expectancy doubled in the last century, humans didn't collapse into despair. They expanded ambitions, built institutions, pursued larger projects. The path forward isn't about losing urgency, but finding new sources of meaning: reinvention, exploration, contributions across longer arcs. With more time, the canvas grows larger, not emptier. The role of adversity also remains vital. Longer lives won't come from endless comfort. Survival circuits activate under stress: fasting, exercise, challenges. Longevity science may give us pills, but the deepest path forward is embracing controlled discomfort. Societies that continue to design lives of ease, constant food, minimal movement will accelerate decline no matter what drugs exist. The path forward must weave biology with lifestyle, ancient wisdom with modern science. Economics plays a decisive role. Right now, trillions are spent managing the diseases of aging. Extending health span would cut those costs dramatically. Imagine adding a decade of healthy life to millions. That means fewer hospitalizations, fewer surgeries, fewer years of dependency. Healthy elders could keep contributing, mentoring, innovating. Economies that embrace longevity will thrive, while those that ignore it will drown in medical debt. The detective clue is clear. Longevity is not just humane, it's pragmatic. Still, the path forward is not guaranteed. Resistance will be fierce. Some will call it unnatural, hubristic, a violation of cosmic order. Others will fear overpopulation, inequality, stagnation. These fears are real, but they are challenges to manage, not reasons to surrender. Every great advance antibiotics, vaccines, transplants, IV have faced the same outcry before becoming normal. Longevity science will be no different. The detective story leaves us with a vision. Imagine a world where people live not just longer but better, where hospitals are no longer dominated by chronic disease, where elders are not frail dependents but active contributors, where children grow up expecting their grandparents to hike, teach, create, and dream alongside them. That world is possible. The path forward isn't easy, but it is clear. So we stand at the crossroads. One path leads to more of the same: short lives, long suffering, endless costs. The other leads to a new era: long, healthy lives, new possibilities, expanded meaning. The detective case has revealed the culprit of aging, uncovered the tools to fight it, and pointed to the road ahead. What remains is choice. The path forward exists, but will we walk it? Picture the closing scene of a detective story. The clues have been gathered, the suspects interrogated, the puzzle nearly solved. But instead of one final reveal, the ending leaves you staring not at a solved case, but at a doorway flung wide open. That's what this conclusion is. Not a tidy resolution, but an invitation to step into a new era. The question isn't whether we can change aging anymore. It's what we will do now that we know we can. The journey began with a grandmother's decline, a painful reminder that aging robs us not only of years, but of vitality, dignity, and meaning. From there, the investigation uncovered how ancient survival circuits, designed to help primitive life withstand famine and stress, became the hidden levers of longevity. We traced how information, not just genetic, but epigenetic, is lost over time, corrupting the performance of cells, like a pianist losing their place in the score. We saw how this loss lies at the root of nearly every disease of old age, making aging the greatest risk factor of all. The clues point to a startling conclusion. Aging is not an immutable law of nature. It is a process, and processes can be slowed, even reversed. Calorie restriction, exercise, fasting, adversity, each nudges survival pathways into action. Molecules like metformin, rapamycin, NA boosters, and resveratrol show that pills may one day mimic those effects. Reprogramming technologies hint that youth is not gone but buried, waiting to be restored. The case is no longer unsolved. The culprit is in plain view. But knowing the culprit is only the beginning. The real question is what humanity does with this knowledge. Longer lives are within reach, but they come with challenges as vast as the opportunities. Healthcare must shift from reactive to preventive. Economies must adapt to workers and contributors who thrive into their second century. Families must rebalance across 5 or 6 generations. Culture must redefine meaning when time stretches far beyond what we once imagined. The detective story leaves us with both urgency and responsibility. Urgency, because every day, thousands die of age-related diseases' lives that could be extended if therapies were developed faster. Responsibility, because the choices we make now will shape whether longevity becomes a privilege for the few or a benefit for all. The science gives us tools, but society must decide how to use them. The conclusion of this journey is that death from aging is not inevitable in the way we once believed. Accidents, infections, and violence will always claim lives. But the slow, predictable unraveling of aging is different. It can be delayed, softened, perhaps even reset. The dream is not immortality, but vitality. more years of life lived fully, fewer years of frailty and suffering. A world where people remain strong, clear-minded, and purposeful until the very end. But with longer lives comes the deeper question of meaning. Mortality once gave urgency to life, forcing us to choose, create, love, and strive within a narrow window. If time expands, will meaning dissolve? History suggests no. When life expectancy doubled in the last century, humans didn't collapse into ennui. They expanded education, built careers, pursued art, and deepened relationships. Longer lives opened new possibilities. With more time, meaning didn't shrink, it grew. The shape of the future is not fixed. In one scenario, longevity deepens inequality, entrenches elites, and strains the planet. In another, it fuels creativity, responsibility, and shared progress. Both futures are possible, and the difference will not be science. It will be choice. The tools of longevity will emerge regardless. Whether they uplift or divide depends on how we govern them. So where does the path forward lead? To a world where hospitals are no longer dominated by chronic diseases of age. Where 80-year-olds start companies, 90-year-olds write novels, and 100-year-olds teach new generation skills earned across decades. Where families are not burdened by decades of decline, but blessed with longer years of shared vitality. Where societies invest not just in living longer, but in living better. The detective case closes on a note of possibility. Aging has been unmasked as a solvable problem. The tools are emerging. The evidence is strong. What remains is courage, the courage to recognize aging as the greatest challenge and opportunity of our time, and to act before millions more are lost unnecessarily. Picture again that open doorway. Beyond it lies a future we have never known, where the boundaries of human life are stretched, where the final chapters are written not in decline, but in clarity. We stand at the threshold. The mystery of aging is no longer whether it can be changed, it's how boldly we will choose to change it.